The first police cruiser rolled into our driveway at exactly 8:14 in the morning. I remember the time because my grandfather looked up from his coffee, glanced at the old wall clock in the kitchen, and calmly said, "Well, this ought to be interesting." Outside, 2 HOA board members stood near the mailbox wearing matching smug expressions like they had just won the lottery. And right in the center of them stood Karen Whitmore, president of the Maple Creek Estates HOA, self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood, professional nightmare. Karen had spent the last 3 years terrorizing residents over garbage cans, lawn height, mailbox paint, and unauthorized holiday decorations. But my grandfather, he never cared about her authority. That drove her insane. My grandfather, Walter Hayes, was 78 years old, retired Army, Vietnam veteran, Purple Heart recipient, and one of the calmest men I had ever known. He lived in the same farmhouse at the edge of Maple Creek for over 40 years, long before the HOA even existed. That fact alone bothered Karen, because technically, the HOA neighborhood had been built around his original property. And deep down, Karen hated that one old man refused to bow to her rules, especially after Grandpa publicly embarrassed her during a homeowners meeting 6 months earlier. Karen demanded he remove the massive American flag hanging from a barn. Grandpa laughed directly in her face. Not angrily, not loudly, just one quiet laugh. Then he said, "I fought under that flag before you were born, sweetheart." The room exploded. Karen never forgot it. After that day, she targeted him nonstop. Violation notices, fake complaints, parking warnings, noise citation for his tractor. One time she even tried fining him because his dog barked too aggressively. Nobody in the neighborhood respected Karen anymore, but people still feared her because HOAs are power, and Karen abused every ounce of it. 3 days earlier, she posted another violation notice on Grandpa's fence. Unapproved exterior structure. She was referring to the old wooden veterans memorial near the barn, a memorial containing the names of local soldiers who died overseas, including Grandpa's younger brother. Grandpa tore the notice down immediately. Apparently Karen took that personally. Now the police stood outside. One officer knocked firmly on the door. Grandpa stood slowly. "Stay inside," he told me calmly. "I'm coming with you." "No," he replied quietly. "Watch carefully instead." Something about the way he said it made me listen. We stepped onto the porch together. Karen crossed her arms instantly. "There he is." One officer approached professionally. "Sir, we receive reports of threats and aggressive behavior." Grandpa blinked once. "From who?" Karen pointed dramatically. "Him." The officer looked confused already. What exactly happened? Karen pulled out papers immediately. This resident has repeatedly harassed the HOA board and refused lawful compliance. Grandpa smiled slightly. That's not what he asked. The younger officer tried staying neutral. "So, did you threaten anyone?" "Nope." Karen jumped in again. "He intimidated board members during yesterday's inspection." Grandpa tilted his head. "You mean when 3 strangers walked onto my property without permission?" Karen's face tightened. "We were conducting official HOA business." "You were trespassing." That word changed the atmosphere instantly. The older officer looked toward Karen. "Did the board notify the homeowner before entering?" Karen hesitated. "Tiny mistake. Huge mistake. Well, no, but..." "So you entered private property without notice." Karen's confidence cracked slightly. "The HOA covenant permits." Grandpa interrupted calmly. "My property predates your HOA by 20 years. Now both officers looked interested. Karen rushed forward aggressively. This man has become hostile toward the association. Grandpa leaned lightly against the porch rail. "You called the police because I wouldn't remove a veteran's memorial." The younger officer frowned. "A memorial?" I could see Karen realizing things weren't going how she expected. She quickly shifted tactics. His refusing lawful HOA enforcement. Grandpa smiled again. "You keep saying lawful like it magically makes nonsense true." The older officer glanced toward the barn, then noticed a memorial. American flags surrounded the wooden structure, names engraved carefully, flowers placed beneath it. The officer's expression changed immediately. His posture softened. "Your brother served?" he asked quietly. Grandpa nodded. "Key song." The officer went silent for a second. Then Karen made the biggest mistake of her entire life. She pointed toward the memorial and said, "That structure lowers neighborhood property values." The silence afterward felt nuclear. Even the younger officer looked horrified. Grandpa stared at her quietly. Not angry, not emotional, just disappointed. And somehow that felt worse. Karen kept talking anyway. "We've given him multiple opportunities to comply." Grandpa folded his arms. "You mean surrender?" Karen stepped forward. "You are not above HOA authority." Grandpa looked directly into her eyes. "And you're not above the Constitution." That line hit hard, but Karen still didn't understand the danger she was in, because at that exact moment, 3 black SUVs turned onto our road. Dark windows, government plates, moving fast. The police officers noticed first. Then Karen, then everybody else. The SUVs stopped directly beside the driveway. 4 men stepped out wearing navy windbreakers with bold yellow letters across the back. FBI. And suddenly, Karen Whitmore didn't look nearly as confident anymore. The moment the federal agents stepped out of those SUVs, the entire atmosphere changed. Fast. The police officers immediately straightened. Karen looked confused, then nervous, then pale. One FBI agent walked directly toward my grandfather. Tall guy, buzz cut, serious expression. The kind of man who looked like he smiled maybe twice a year. He stopped in front of Grandpa and extended his hand. "Walter Hayes." Grandpa nodded calmly. Been a while since anyone used a full name. The agent actually smiled slightly. Special Agent Daniel Mercer. They shook hands like old acquaintances. That terrified Karen instantly, because suddenly this wasn't some helpless old homeowner anymore. This was someone federal agents personally respected. Karen tried recovering control. "Excuse me," she snapped. "What exactly is going on here?" Agent Mercer ignored her completely. Instead, he looked at Grandpa. "Mind if we speak privately?" Grandpa glanced toward the porch. "No secrets. Say it here." Mercer nodded once, then looked toward the officers. "We'll take it from here." Karen stepped forward immediately. "Take what from here?" Another agent opened a black folder. "Mrs. Whitmore." Karen straightened. "Yes." "You're currently under federal investigation regarding fraudulent veterans grant allocations tied to Maple Creek Estates HOA. The entire world seemed to stop moving. Even the wind disappeared. Karen blinked rapidly. What?" Agent Mercer remained emotionless. Over $200,000 in federal community preservation funds were redirected through HOA development accounts. The older police officers slowly looked toward Karen, then toward the memorial, then back toward Karen. And suddenly everything connected. The beautification projects, the HOA construction plans, the pressure to remove the Veterans Memorial. Karen wasn't trying to enforce rules. She was trying to erase evidence. Karen laughed nervously. "This is absurd." One agent handed her documents. "No, this is financial fraud." Her hands visibly shook. Board member Richard Coleman immediately stepped backward. "I had nothing to do with finances." "Coward. Classic coward behavior." Karen snapped toward him. "Richard, don't start." Another agent interrupted calmly. "We already subpoenaed HOA banking records." That crushed the remaining confidence right out of her face. Grandpa quietly sipped his coffee beside me like this was morning television. I whispered, "You knew." Without looking at me, Grandpa answered, "I suspected." Suspected what? That Karen was too stupid to realize federal money comes with federal oversight. The younger officer almost laughed. Karen pointed furiously toward Grandpa. "He's manipulating this." Agent Mercer finally acknowledged her. "Mrs. Whitmore, your HOA submitted grant applications claiming this property contained an abandoned, unsafe structure." He pointed toward the memorial. Karen swallowed hard. The application also claimed restoration funds would honor local veterans. The silence afterward felt deadly, because now everybody understood what happened. Karen used federal veterans grants to finance HOA projects, and Grandpa's memorial stood directly in the way. Worse, the memorial itself proved her paperwork was false. She didn't call the police because Grandpa was dangerous. She called them because she wanted him intimidated before investigators arrived. But she had no idea Grandpa already contacted federal authorities weeks earlier. That was a twist nobody saw coming, including me. Agent Mercer looked toward Grandpa again. Your documentation helped a lot. Karen's head snapped around. Documentation. Grandpa calmly pointed toward the house. Kept every letter you sent. Now Karen looked genuinely terrified. Every violation notice, every threat, every demand to remove the memorial, all documented, all time-stamped, all connected to fraudulent grant filings. Grandpa had been building evidence quietly while Karen kept digging herself deeper. Mercer opened the folder again. We also recovered internal HOA emails. Karen whispered, "Oh, God." Exactly. One email specifically destroyed her. Subject line: Remove Hayes Memorial before inspection. Sent directly by Karen to the entire HOA board. The police officers exchanged looks immediately. Even they knew the situation had become catastrophic. Karen tried one last desperate move. This man threatened me. Agent Mercer looked bored. We reviewed your body cam footage from yesterday's property visit. Now Karen's face turned completely white, because he forgot something important. Grandpa had security cameras everywhere, and apparently, federal agents already watched the footage. Mercer continued calmly. You trespass onto private property while attempting to pressure a decorated veteran into removing a lawful memorial connected to a federal grant investigation. Each word hit harder than the last. Richard Coleman quietly whispered, "We're screwed." Yes, they were. Then came the final blow. Agent Mercer looked directly at Karen. "Mrs. Whitmore, we need you to come with us." Karen stepped backward instantly. "I'm not under arrest." "No," Mercer replied calmly. "Not yet." That word hit like a shotgun blast. Karen looked around desperately. Nobody helped her. Not the board. Not the police. Nobody. Because suddenly everybody understood the truth. The HOA president who spent years bullying homeowners had just called local police on a 78-year-old veteran, only for the FBI to arrive investigating her instead. And things were about to get much worse. News spreads fast in HOA neighborhoods. But scandal? Scandal spreads like wildfire soaked in gasoline. By noon, everybody in Maple Creek knew federal agents visited Grandpa's property. By dinner, local news helicopters circled overhead. Karen Whitmore's perfect little HOA empire started collapsing in real time. And the craziest part? Grandpa remained completely calm through all of it, while reporters gathered outside the neighborhood entrance. He sat on the porch cleaning fishing gear like nothing happened. I finally asked a question driving me insane. "When did you contact the FBI?" Grandpa adjusted the fishing reel slowly. "About 4 months ago." I nearly choked. 4 months. He nodded. I noticed inconsistencies. "With what?" "The grant signs." That confused me completely. Grandpa pointed toward the neighborhood clubhouse visible down the road. Federal grant plaques always contain tracking numbers. I stared at him. "You notice that?" Army taught me paperwork matters. Apparently, Grandpa researched the grant himself after Karen first threatened the memorial. What he discovered triggered everything. The HOA claimed federal veterans preservation money, funded community restoration, but almost none of the money went toward veterans. Instead, luxury landscaping, clubhouse renovations, private security gates. Karen basically used patriotic grant programs like a personal ATM. And Grandpa quietly documented all of it. Emily walked onto the porch holding her phone. "You need to see this." Local news already released a headline. FBI investigates HOA board following veteran memorial dispute. Underneath, a photo of Karen standing beside police cars looking horrified. Honestly, it was beautiful. Grandpa barely reacted. MM. That was it. Just MM. The man had ice water in his veins. Then another vehicle pulled into the driveway. Not federal this time. Neighbors. Lots of neighbors. One by one, residents started approaching the house. At first cautiously, then openly, almost like fear itself had vanished overnight. Mr. Jenkins from across the street spoke first. "Walter, is it true?" Grandpa nodded once. "They stole federal money." "Looks that way." A woman near the mailbox suddenly burst into tears. "That woman fined us $3,000 last year." Another resident shouted. "She threatened foreclosure over paint colors." Then came more stories. More anger. More truth. People had been terrified of Karen for years. Now suddenly they realized something important. Bullies aren't invincible, especially federal investigation bullies. By evening, residents flooded the HOA Facebook group demanding emergency resignations. Karen disappeared completely. No posts, no statements, no threats, nothing, which honestly scared people even more, because silence from control freaks usually means panic. Around 8 p.m., Agent Mercer returned alone. Grandpa invited him onto the porch. The agent looked exhausted. "Big day?" Mercer laughed quietly. "You have no idea." Then he became serious. "We executed search warrants at the HOA office. And..." Mercer glanced toward me. "Your grandfather was right about everything." Turns out the corruption went even deeper. Fake invoices, shell contractors, personal spending hidden inside maintenance budgets. And worst of all, Karen intentionally used veteran-related grants because federal approvals moved faster. That made the crimes even uglier. Grandpa shook his head slowly. "Disrespectful." Mercer nodded. "Very." Then the agent asked something surprising. "Why didn't you go public sooner?" Grandpa stared out toward the memorial. "Because loud accusations without evidence just create noise." He looked toward Mercer calmly. "I wanted proof." That line stuck with me. Proof. That's what separated Grandpa from people like Karen. Karen relied on intimidation. Grandpa relied on facts. One creates fear. The other destroys lies. Suddenly flashing lights appeared again down the road. But this time, not police. Media. A crowd gathered near the neighborhood entrance. Reporters everywhere. And standing right in front of cameras was Karen Whitmore, trying desperately to save herself. Big mistake, because the second reporters started asking questions about federal fraud, Karen completely lost control. She blamed board members, then blamed contractors, then blamed confusing grant procedures. Nobody bought any of it, especially after reporters discovered HOA records showing Karen personally approved most transactions. Agent Mercer watched quietly beside us, then sighed. "She's done." Grandpa nodded once. "Yep." But none of us realized yet. The absolute worst evidence still hadn't surfaced. And when it did, Karen Whitmore's entire life would explode on national television. 2 days later, Maple Creek looked like a disaster zone. News trucks, lawyers, investigators, residents demanding answers everywhere. The HOA clubhouse stayed locked under federal order. And Karen Whitmore completely vanished. Nobody knew where she went. Rumors spread nonstop. Some people claimed she fled town. Others said she hired criminal defense attorneys. One rumor claimed she blamed everything on the treasurer. Honestly, I believed all of them, because desperate people do desperate things. That afternoon, Agent Mercer invited Grandpa and me to the federal field office downtown. The moment we arrived, I knew something major happened. Mercer looked energized, focused, like investigators do when they finally catch the missing piece. He led us into a conference room, then placed a digital recorder on the table. Grandpa raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Mercer smiled slightly. "The end." Turns out federal investigators recovered deleted HOA server backups, including private board meeting recordings Karen thought were erased forever. Mercer pressed play. Karen's voice filled the room instantly. Sharp, arrogant, familiar. "We need Hayes out of the way before inspectors arrive." My stomach tightened. Another board member sounded nervous. "He's a veteran, Karen." "I don't care." That line made even Mercer shake his head slightly. The recording continued. If the memorial stays standing, investigators will start asking questions about where the grant money actually went. Grandpa remained perfectly still. but I noticed his jaw tighten slightly. That's how I knew he was furious. Karen kept talking. Pressure him harder. Fine him. Threaten him. I want compliance before federal review. Then came the line that destroyed her forever. If he resists, call the police. Old men scare easily. The room went silent. Even the air felt heavy. Mercer stopped the recording slowly. Well, he said quietly, there it is. Premeditation, intimidation, fraud, conspiracy, all gift-wrapped in Karen's own voice. Grandpa leaned back calmly. She always talked too much. Mercer nodded. She also stole a lot. Federal investigators now believe nearly $400,000 disappeared through fake vendor contracts, money intended for veteran preservation projects. And Karen personally approved most payments. I stared at the recorder. She really thought nobody would catch this. Mercer laughed once. Corrupt people always think they are smarter than everyone else. Then his expression darkened, until evidence shows up. By evening, portions of the recording leaked online. Everything exploded instantly. National news picked up the story. Veterans organizations demanded prosecution. State officials publicly condemned the HOA. And Karen finally got arrested. The footage aired everywhere. Federal agents escorting Karen Whitmore from a hotel lobby in handcuffs, still wearing oversized sunglasses trying to hide her face. Didn't work. The internet tore her apart, especially after the recording aired publicly. People were furious, not just because she stole money, because she targeted a veteran memorial to cover it up. That cross a line Americans take personally. Maple Creek residents gathered outside Grandpa's house that night carrying candles and flags. No protest signs, no speeches, just support. Mr. Jenkins stepped onto the porch holding a folded American flag. We wanted Walter to have this. Grandpa looked genuinely surprised for the first time all week. Appreciate it. One Marine veteran approached quietly. You stood up when nobody else would. Grandpa shook his head. No. He pointed toward the crowd. We stood up. That mattered. Because the truth? Karen only stayed powerful because everyone felt isolated. Once residents united, her empire collapsed almost instantly. Later that night, after everyone left, I sat beside Grandpa near the memorial. You knew she was dirty from beginning, didn't you? He stared toward the old engraved names. I knew honest people don't fear transparency. The wind moved softly through the flags surrounding the memorial. Grandpa looked tired suddenly. Older, but peaceful too. Then he smiled slightly. You know the funniest part. What? She called the cops expecting me to panic. I laughed. Instead, the FBI showed up. Grandpa nodded slowly. Life's funny sometimes. But the story still wasn't over. Because the next morning, federal investigators uncovered something even worse hidden inside the HOA financial records. Something that shocked the entire state. The federal raid happened at sunrise. 10 agents, 3 vehicles, search warrants for multiple HOA board members simultaneously. And by the end of the day, Maple Creek Estates officially became one of the biggest HOA corruption scandals in state history. Turns out Karen Whitmore wasn't acting alone. Not even close. The deeper investigators dug, the uglier everything became. Board members approved fake maintenance contracts tied to relatives. HOA funds paid for vacations, luxury furniture, personal legal bills, even cosmetic surgery expenses hidden inside landscaping budgets. Residents were furious, but the most disgusting discovery involved veterans' grants. Investigators uncovered forged photographs submitted with federal applications, fake restoration projects, fabricated memorial expenses. Karen literally used dead soldiers as financial cover. That made national headlines instantly. Grandpa watched the news quietly from his recliner. They dishing it good, men, he said softly. That sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. By afternoon, federal agents searched Karen's actual house. Neighbors recorded everything. Boxes carried out nonstop. Computers, financial records, cash. One resident whispered, "She's finished." No, finished was too gentle. Karen Whitmore's entire life was imploding publicly. Meanwhile, residents flooded Grandpa's property with support. Veterans groups delivered flowers. People left handwritten thank you notes near the memorial. Even local police officers returned privately to apologize for how Karen manipulated the original call. The older officer shook Grandpa's hand firmly. We should have recognized what was happening sooner. Grandpa nodded respectfully. You were doing your job. That's who he was. Never dramatic, never cruel, even toward people who made mistakes. That evening, Governor's office representatives visited the property personally. I honestly thought Grandpa would hate the attention. Instead, he tolerated it politely. Barely. One official stood beside the memorial during a small press conference. What Mr. Hayes protected here represents integrity. Grandpa muttered quietly beside me. Here come the politicians. I almost laughed out loud. But honestly, the attention mattered, because millions of Americans suddenly saw how dangerous unchecked HOA power could become. Residents from across the country shared horror stories online. Threats, selective enforcement, harassment, financial abuse. Karen became the symbol of every nightmare HOA president people feared. Then came the biggest shock of all. Federal prosecutors announced potential racketeering charges. RICO. That changed everything, because now investigators believe the HOA operated like an organized fraud scheme, not isolated corruption, systemic corruption. Karen's attorney immediately requested plea negotiations. Of course, because once federal RICO discussions begin, smart criminals panic fast. That night, Grandpa sat beside the memorial alone. I joined him quietly. You okay? He nodded slowly. Just thinking. About what? My brother. The engraved name near the center reflected softly under the memorial lights. Thomas Hayes, killed in Vietnam. Age 22. Grandpa stared at it for a long moment. Men died under those flags, he said quietly. His voice cracked slightly for the first time, and she used them for money. I didn't know what to say, because honestly, there was nothing to say. Some things are too ugly for words. Then Grandpa looked at me. But truth matters. I nodded. Yeah. And eventually truth catches up. That line stayed with me, because that's exactly what happened here. Karen built her power on fear, lies, and intimidation. Grandpa built his case on patience and evidence. And in the end, evidence won. But one final moment still waited ahead. One moment that would leave the entire courtroom speechless. 3 months later, the federal courtroom overflowed with reporters. Karen Whitmore sat beside her attorneys looking completely broken. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the confidence. Now she looked hollow, small, defeated. Good, because the damage she caused reached far beyond stolen money. She poisoned an entire community with fear. Federal prosecutors laid out everything. Fraud, conspiracy, wire fraud, misuse of federal grants, evidence tampering, witness intimidation. The list kept going. Board members flipped on each other instantly. Several accepted plea deals. Cowards until the end. Karen tried denying responsibility at first, until prosecutors played the recording. Again and again, every ugly sentence echoed through the courtroom. Old men scare easily. That line especially destroyed her, because sitting directly behind prosecutors was my grandfather, wearing his army jacket, purple heart pinned carefully over his chest. The courtroom watched him more than Karen. Even the judge seemed affected. During sentencing, prosecutors described how Karen weaponized HOA authority against a decorated veteran to conceal federal crimes. Then they showed photographs of the memorial she tried destroying. The room became silent. Judge Eleanor Watkins removed her glasses slowly and looked directly at Karen. You targeted patriotism itself for personal greed. Karen cried. Nobody cared. Then something unexpected happened. The judge addressed Grandpa directly. Mr. Hayes, would you please stand? Grandpa rose slowly. Every person in that courtroom watched him. The judge's voice softened. This court thanks you for your service. Then she paused. And for your courage. Nobody moved. Even reporters stopped typing. Judge Watkins continued. You protected not only your family's rights, but an entire community from corruption. Grandpa nodded respectfully once. That was all. No speech. No drama. Just dignity. Karen received 7 years in federal prison. Several board members received lesser sentences. The HOA itself dissolved under court supervision. And Maple Creek Estates, completely rebuilt under new management. Months later, the neighborhood held a ceremony beside Grandpa's memorial. Hundreds attended. Veterans, families, police officers. Even Agent Mercer showed up. A new plaque stood beside the memorial now. It read, "Dedicated to those who stood for truth when intimidation failed." Grandpa hated the attention, naturally, but deep down, I think he appreciated what it represented. As sunset covered the field, Agent Mercer stood beside us quietly. "You know," he said, "most people would have folded." Grandpa smiled faintly. "Most people don't keep Army records for 50 years. Mercer laughed, then looked toward the memorial. "You did good, Walter." Grandpa stared at the engraved names. "No," he replied softly, "they did." He pointed toward the fallen soldiers listed there. And suddenly I understood something important. This entire fight was never really about Karen, or the HOA, or even the investigation. It was about protecting memory, honor, truth, because people like Karen survive when decent people stay silent. My grandfather refused silence, and in the end, that old veteran sitting quietly on his porch brought down an entire corrupt HOA board, all because they made one catastrophic mistake. They called the cops on the wrong grandpa.